Antarctica, the most undiscovered continent on Earth, and for very good reasons. Freezing temperatures and deadly storms have defeated many explorers and scientists seeking to understand this mysterious land on which man has never lived. Today, they know enough to survive this beautiful though hostile place, but events are now unfolding here that may spell disaster for the rest of the world. What we find here today is unnerving. Glaciers are melting rapidly into the ocean, threatening to flood the world's coastlines. Penguins are walking off to their death in inexplicable suicide marches. Seals are struck blind by ultraviolet rays. Starfish are unable to reproduce. And the continent's largest land animal, a creature smaller than a common housefly, is facing possible extinction. And now, on newly exposed rocky landscapes, seeing sunlight for the very first time, green vegetation is thriving in the world's largest desert. Has an irreversible environmental change begun here? Or can we, as a global community, work together to save our planet as well as ourselves? This is the Antarctica Challenge. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, global temperatures have been increasing steadily for the past 100 years, with 7 of the 8 warmest years on record occurring since 2001. The most dramatic rise has been here, in Antarctica, as scientists from every discipline search for clues and hopefully answers. Warming temperatures here mean melting ice, and that means flooding for the rest of the world. Dr. Julian Scott, a geophysicist with the British Antarctic Survey, believes we have to prepare for this catastrophe today.
Adding the water to the ocean will cause more flooding, and we'll need to put up more flood defences and build our cities in a different way because of it.
Pine Island is one of Antarctica's largest glaciers. Over 250 kilometers long, approximately the distance between New York City and Boston, and 2 kilometers thick, it is the greatest contributor of ice flow into the ocean of any ice drainage basin in the world. In this time-lapse photography of a melting glacier, we can see just how quickly large areas of ice can move from the rocky shores to the sea. Through his extensive study, Dr. Scott has found that Pine Island Glacier alone is currently adding 46 gigatons of fresh water to the world's sea level every year.
The main reason the glacier is increasing its speed at the moment is thought by most scientists working on the area to be due to warm ocean water. Now, this isn't necessarily water that's been affected by atmospheric changes in the recent history. This is deep ocean water off the edge of the continental shelf that is somehow being pushed up onto the continental shelf by the wind patterns and the pressure systems in Antarctica, and shifting warm water right to the area of this glacier where it starts to float. Now this is thinning this area of the glacier, and by thinning this floating portion of the glacier, this causes a reduction in the pressure, which means there's less holding the glacier back, which means it can speed up.
Another cause of the faster moving ice is the warming of the newly exposed rock that extends beneath the ice. As the sun warms this bare rock, it creates an endothermic reaction that heats the rock bed and melts the ice from underneath. Antarctica holds 70% of the world's fresh water in its ice. According to NASA, if the land ice of the west coast of the continent alone were to melt, the world's sea level would rise 18 to 20 feet. This would result in massive flooding around the world, as well as increased weight and pressure on the world's seabed. This, in turn, could provide severe stress on oceanic fault lines, resulting in earthquakes and tsunamis. Even the ozone hole may be contributing to this problem by the way it has changed weather patterns here.
Now, one theory that's been suggested is it actually could be anthropogenic, but due to the ozone hole over Antarctica, which has been shown to change the weather systems around Antarctica, or we could be seeing El Nino type effects in the southern weather systems. The wind is driving this ocean water up to the front of the glacier. There's a huge ice sheet grounded largely below sea level, which is why we're concerned about it. But the ice is very thick and extends way above sea level, so obviously if we were to lose it, it would contribute to the global sea levels. And in fact, the whole of the West Antarctic ice sheet could contribute up to 5 meters. And the Amundsen Sea area, where Pine Island and Thwaites glaciers are, that have both been noted to be speeding up recently, that could contribute around 1.5 meters to global sea level.
Dr. Scott is one of many scientists dedicated to studying Antarctica. He spends long periods of study in the field, but returns home to analyze his findings. His headquarters are located here, half a world away, in the historic university town of Cambridge, England. His research, along with others at the British Antarctic Survey, pays tribute to the first scientific expeditions in Antarctica 100 years ago. While many ships and lives were lost in those early days by explorers the world over, it was one British explorer who is perhaps best known for paving the way for scientific study here today, Sir Ernest Shackleton. In 1909, he led one of the very first scientific expeditions to Antarctica.
Ernest Shackleton really filled the old dictionary definition of an explorer, one who explores to discover new lands. There are very few new lands left to discover, under the sea possibly, and of course in space in the future. But for scientists, there are always new lands, and they never stop discovering. Well, during the early expeditions, polar science was really a matter of observation more than very precise science. I mean, they didn't have the gear. But a lot of scientific research was accomplished during the Nimrod expedition, and they did accomplish some notable firsts. They did discover the South Magnetic Pole, which is not a fixed point, but moves about 6 miles a year.
That was enough for Shackleton to secure a second expedition. However, this time, it didn't turn out as expected.
When the ship became trapped in the ice, it was hoped that she would rise above it and be able to be floated once more, but instead she was slowly crushed. They watched with horror as this took place. Eventually, the mast came down, And you can see the group looking rather desolate on the ice. They're home, because the ship is always a sailor's home, gone. They were in a very dangerous situation. No one knew where they were.
Shackleton and his crew were left stranded and fighting for their lives for over a year and a half. Amazingly, Shackleton led his Endurance crew back to safety without losing one life. Their incredible story of survival is commemorated by one of Antarctica's very few museums. With many of their supplies still on its shelves, this unique museum provides an eerie reminder of how difficult survival is in this harsh land. A struggle which helped give inspiration to an international treaty 50 years later. For the first time in human history, 12 nations were able to agree to administer an entire continent. Signed on December 1st, 1959, the Antarctica Treaty bans any military activity and restricts any human occupation solely to scientific study. Never before has the world come together to jointly govern a continent rather than fight over its ownership. Today, there are 47 nations ensuring the peaceful use of Antarctica strictly for scientific research. One of the more recent countries to sign the treaty is Ukraine. Dr. Evgeny Keryagin is a seismologist from Ukraine. His country joined the treaty in 1992 and took over Great Britain's Faraday Research Station, renaming it Vernadsky Station. He believes that the melting fresh water is contributing to the further melting of the ice in a very unusual way.
На мой взгляд, увеличение температуры в районе Антарктиды приведет к тому, что больше снега будет таять, то, что больше ледников будет, больше масса льда будет обрушаться из ледников, а это в свою очередь приведет к снижению уровня солености воды, больше будет процесс опреснения, что может привести к увеличению массы воды, которая будет испаряться в атмосферу. Это, в свою очередь, может привести уже к большему проценту выпадения осадков в виде дождя и снега. Вот в этом году, в декабре этого года, уровень снега получил свое максимальное значение, где-то приблизительно 1 метр 80 сантиметров. Этих осадков было больше, чем зимой. То есть летом выпало снега больше, чем зимой здесь, в Антарктиде.
Dr. Keryagin warns that the increased precipitation will accelerate the melting of the glacier ice, compounding and accelerating the process as more fresh water from the melting land ice dilutes the salt water of the Antarctic Ocean. Since fresh water evaporates faster than salt water, there will be a lot more rain and snow here. Over the past 20 years, the continent of Antarctica has diminished in size dramatically, shrinking the ice fields at an alarming rate. How much further can Antarctica shrink before its melting ice floods the world? Dr. Keryagin is measuring this melting every day through a series of seismology tests designed to record shifts in glacial movement.
Здесь на станции я провожу сейсмические исследования, и одним из интересных таких моментов моей работы – это исследование состояния ледовой активности на континенте и вообще вокруг станции, в акватории. 2 года тому назад я начал подсчитывать количество сигналов, которые генерируются от ближайшего ледника на континентальной части.
Dr. Keriagan has been recording vibrations from nearby glaciers. He claims that the increased frequency of seismic signals tells him that the climate is warming.
Могу сказать, что в день регистрировал порядка около 1000 сигналов. Это сигналы от обрушений ледовой кромки ледников. Что все-таки заметно потепление климата, идет увеличение средней температуры, и, скорее всего, этот процесс провоцирует увеличение количества сигналов. На мой взгляд, увеличение количества сигналов, которые генерируются близлежащими ледниками, свидетельствует о некотором увеличении температуры в районе Антарктиды.
If he's right, more glaciers will soon resemble this one, diluting the sea with fresh ice water at unprecedented speeds. At this continued rate, it could mean catastrophic flooding for most of the coastal towns and cities of the planet. Are we too late? Is there anything we can do now to slow and perhaps even reverse this continent's warming to prevent world flooding? Most scientists predict that the world's coastal towns and cities will be hit the hardest by the rising sea levels and the ensuing hurricanes, earthquakes, and tsunamis. Coastal cities that are the center of life to millions are at peril. Cities like San Francisco. This picturesque coastal city in California is the occasional home of renowned environmentalist and penguin specialist Dr. David Ainley, who, after spending more than 30 years in the field in Antarctica, has likely spent more time there than here. His contribution to scientific study in Antarctica is so significant, a mountain there has been named after him, Ainley's Peak. He believes that cities like his will soon have some serious environmental issues to deal with.
I think we are going to see some major problems. We are too late by 20 years. And I mean, it's really serious. Well, anybody that lives on the coast is going to be having problems. It doesn't take much of a rise in sea level, just an inch, and that's huge when you get a storm surge, you know, from a nor'easter or a hurricane or that sort of thing. You know, if foreclosures are happening on beachfront, that's probably a good thing, because those properties are history anyway.
And while today's Antarctic scientists are suggesting we need to relocate to higher ground, the penguins here are already being forced to do the same thing.
There are up to 7 species of penguins that might occur in the Antarctic. 4 of those are relatively common. And if we start from the largest, the emperor penguin, it's the one that is least tolerant to temperature changes. It's the one that nests the furthest south, the one that nests in the coldest climates. Next would be the Adelie penguin. They're very much dependent on ice flows and the near ice conditions for hunting. So they again would be very much affected by rising temperature changes. The chinstrap penguin is somewhere in between. It is more adaptive. It will move further north and further south than some of the other ones. But the one behind me, the gentoo, is probably the most adaptive. It's the one that might be the super penguin of the Antarctic eventually.
As well, warming waters are responsible for a drastic decline in the penguin's sole food source, the krill. Krill are small shrimp-like marine crustaceans. They're the primary food supply of penguins and all other Antarctic animal life. They travel in schools of millions and are very sensitive to water temperature. A rise in temperature of even half a degree hinders their ability to reproduce, seriously impacting the penguins here. Compounding this problem, is that more whales are entering these waters now that they have become warmer. In one gulp, these whales can consume a quantity of krill that would otherwise feed 2,000 penguins.
If the krill move out of the area entirely, these penguins have to find another food source, and most of them won't be able to. When krill's available, all of the species of smaller penguins, here, the Adelie, the chinstrap, and the gentoo, will eat them almost exclusively. It's only when the krill is in diminishing numbers that they will return to other species. Well, if there's no food, there's no birds, pretty simply. As the food resources change, it's only the species that are able to adapt that are going to survive. The other species, such as the Adelie, the emperor, will have to either stay south or move south into the colder waters and try to catch the krill that are still there.
Over the past 25 years, the population of the Adelie penguins here in the Antarctic Peninsula has dropped by 50%, while the chinstrap numbers have fallen by as much as 65%. But the most noticeable relocation recently has been among the gentoos.
The biggest change that's occurred here is the movement of the gentoo. They're moving further south, they're moving south in greater numbers, they're moving higher up onto the slopes. When you have small numbers of them, they will nest in the nearshore areas. As the population increases in a preferred nesting locale, they'll move up slope. So we have penguins behind me, we have penguins on a higher slope to the right, and then sometimes we'll get penguins even higher up on the slope behind.
So while it looks as though the gentoo is poised to take over the warming west coast of Antarctica, the retreating penguin species are moving to the colder climates down the coast, and individual penguins have begun wandering off to certain death, a phenomenon only recently observed in the past 5 years. Viewed by many as suicide marches, lone penguins have been observed to leave their colony, walk away from the sea, and venture deep into the continent, never to return. Penguin scientist Dr. David Ainley has been studying penguin behavior for 40 years, most of those years in the field in Antarctica. His theory is that these so-called suicidal penguins are actually pioneers, a kind of noble explorer who ventures out on his own to find a new home for his colony.
We have these individual penguins that purportedly are committing suicide by walking away from the sea into the interior of the Antarctic, kind of like Scott did. When these populations expand, it's because of pioneers that find new places. They go off and disappear, and nobody hears about them anymore unless they have a good publicist.
This unusual behavior was first noted when an iceberg measuring 97 nautical miles came to rest at the shore of a large penguin colony, effectively blocking access to their food supply.
And so this big iceberg, B-15A, parked itself in the southern Ross Sea. And so there's a lot of disoriented penguins during those 5 years that essentially have this 97-mile-long fence that went across the Ross Sea. So during this 5 years, there was an increase in the numbers of these penguins that were really beside themselves about which way to go and which would get them to where they wanted to go. Several more of these penguins that were going the wrong way, so to speak. And these would be the heroes that penguins would write about.
However, without the warming temperatures that placed giant icebergs in their path, there would be no heroic penguins looking for a new home for their tribe. Suicide missions aside, the relocation of penguin populations is taking a significant toll on their numbers. As well, global warming in the ozone hole have combined to threaten penguin populations across the continent and may very well cause their extinction. For many penguin species, warming temperatures have reduced the size of ice floes, upon which species such as the emperor penguin hatch their young. Combined with the increased winds resulting from the ozone hole, entire colonies of baby chicks are being blown off the ice to certain death.
But as is being shown at Point Géologie, that colony has decreased by 50% since the mid-70s, and partially it is related to the fact that the fast ice has become too thin, and so it gets blown out repeatedly, and many eggs and chicks are blown away on the ice, with the parents sitting on them. It's okay with the parents, they're used to water, but so this is happening with greater frequency.
Also occurring with greater frequency is an extended period of dependency by young penguins on their parents for food. Young gentoos such as this one have usually begun to collect food for themselves by now, yet more and more of these penguins have been observed to be relying on their parents. Penguins far beyond the age of nestling are having trouble leaving the nest, as it were, perhaps afraid to face the relatively bleak prospects of their diminishing food supplies. Failed mating attempts such as this one have been observed more and more in the past 5 years, suggesting the birds are becoming more disoriented, perhaps another result of their difficulty in adapting to the rapidly changing environment. Another cause for concern, especially among the younger penguins, is the increase in attacks from a predatory bird known as the skua. Usually these birds only attack the eggs of penguins, but as the number of eggs has been reduced, the skua has now become a predator of baby chicks. And since these birds prefer a warmer climate and a rocky shore to live on, more of them are entering the peninsula area, providing the remaining penguin population something they are not used to, a predator. While the warmer climate in Antarctica is impacting on the survival of the once plentiful penguin populations, the increased temperatures are also resulting in the decline of Antarctica's only indigenous land animal, the common fly.
Okay, what we've been looking at here are little tiny terrestrial invertebrates that are the main animal fauna on the Antarctic Peninsula, but they're virtually the only fauna you see in the Antarctic. And what I've been looking at specifically here is a little fly. There are only 2 real flies in Antarctica, and this is one of them. It's the largest land animal in Antarctica, and if you're lucky, it's about 4 or 5 millimeters long and about half a milligram in weight. So it's a really rather a small, cute little insect. Basically, it's a fly without any wings. The Antarctic Peninsula, it's one of the 3 fastest warming parts of the planet at the moment, and these little invertebrates, and in their distribution, are potentially sensitive to these changes. So if it gets warmer, as it is doing, they can carry out their life cycle quicker.
What this means is they die faster. The warmer habitat here can be deadly,